Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 638 Podcast, Episode 5. Today, this is the second part of our three-part series. We're covering Cartoon Network. And basically, Cartoon Network was a huge, huge part of my childhood. Well, joining me today, we have Shulman, Bailey, and a newcomer, Jason. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. Semester's finally over, so now it's time to relax, and I'm glad to be on the show. I'm very excited.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And Shulman and Bailey, how are you guys doing?
Pretty great. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that.
Doing pretty well myself. Pretty honored to be here for the third time. Three-peat.
Yep. First one to
Yep, I'm
three.
jealous of that.
All right, all right. So, I don't know how you guys feel about Cartoon Network, but Um, I think Cartoon Network kind of crept up on me as a kid. Like, it wasn't my favorite when I was really, really, really young, but slowly over time, I feel like they just kept putting out more consistent and consistently, like, better and better content that eventually it crept up and became one of my favorites looking back on it. Now, um, how I want to start this is first I want to talk about, let's talk about OG Cartoon Network. So for OG Cartoon Network, I kind of listed a couple shows that I consider OG Cartoon Network. This is, again, I didn't really, just so everyone knows, I didn't do too much research on the time periods of the shows. This is just how I felt when I was a kid, how I sectioned off these shows. So I would consider OG Cartoon Network, let's say the Johnny Bravo, Dexter's Lab, Powerpuff Girls, and like Ed, Ed and Eddie days. Now, back then,
Yep.
again, those were like the 1990s or late 1990s, early 2000s. That's when I wasn't a big Cartoon Network fan personally. I'm not gonna lie, these shows, like, perhaps it was because of how young I was, or I just felt like the Cartoon Network programming for like that 5 to 6 year old range, which is that was that time for me, really didn't wasn't that existent at that time, and those shows didn't connect that much for me. So the OG Cartoon Network days, I really didn't like. I would click on the shows, but it really didn't do it for me. I wanna throw this over to Bailey. And how did you feel about those shows during that time frame, or were you watching Cartoon Network, or what were you watching?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I was kind of back and forth between Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network growing up. But I think those first few shows on Cartoon Network, like you said, like Johnny Bravo, Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, they definitely kind of had a more, I think, adult style humor to them because it was kind of the first foray into, cartoon programming in general.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of the humor is very surreal, even kind of dark. And I think now if we watch it, it's kind of funny because it kind of holds up and it has tropes that are kind of common across most shows now. Um, but yeah, I think for the 5 to 6 year old range, they definitely were more adult themed, not so. Not, I wouldn't say super kid friendly, but just maybe not the kind of positive, maybe forward thinking shows you see now. Or a lot of shows they have now are geared towards that kind of toddler, very young kid age. Then they
Right.
also have teen shows and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd say they were definitely maybe a little more out of touch from what kids were, I think, feeling at the time.
Yeah, definitely. How do you feel about this, Shulman?
Yeah, so I was a fan of those shows growing up. None of them were something that I was super like invested in or involved in. It was always something that like I was flipping through the channels,
Hmm.
saw a rerun, and I was like, oh cool, like I'll watch an episode of this. It
Right,
was
Shulman.
really
I do
cool.
I do want to ask you, how did that like? So how did those shows at the time compare to what you were watching on other channels? Where did you prefer them over other channels, or did you
Um,
just watch them?
I kind of just watched whatever was on, like depending on like what episode was on of what show, and I probably leaned more towards some of the Nick shows at this time,
Mm.
but it was kind of just whatever was there. And those shows were also like the animation styles was a bit more dated compared to the what I was watching. Things like Fairly Odd Parents,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Neutron, and so I was probably more invested in shows like that.
Right, right. I want to throw it over to Jason now if he has anything to add about that time period of Cartoon Network.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm kind of in the same boat where initially I wasn't really much of a Cartoon Network show watcher. But I would say like a big part of that actually has to do with when I was younger. Like my mom wouldn't let me watch those shows.
Yeah,
Like
I'm in the
she
same
kind of
boat
was
as
like,
you.
no, these are
Yep, I feel that.
these shows are a little too old for you, as like Bailey was saying, and like it just as I got older, that's when I was starting to able to watch the shows like on my own. Like I remember one of the first Cartoon Network shows that I watched was like it was Powerpuff Girls, and like yeah, it released before I was even born, but like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it was sort of more cartoonish and like kid friendly in that kind of era of like you had like, of course Johnny Bravo and like Ed and Eddie, like those are all same like end of '90s era that they first started airing, and like of those Powerpuff Girls was like the most appropriate one. But then as time went on, like uh, I mean, I remember watching like When Named Kids Next Door. That was
Yeah,
great.
I'm sure.
And then
I don't want to spoil too
getting
much,
into
but
like
we'll get
right,
into
right,
it.
right, of course. But yeah, I mean, like as like I got older, at least I was able to watch more shows.
Yeah.
So like OG Cartoon Network is like yeah, kind of no, uh, kind of iconic. Like at least in my eyes, iconic. But like
Mm-hmm.
the later ones are more memorable to me.
Yeah, I mean, going back to my point, I feel like we're all kind of in the same boat where, like, I feel like Cartoon Network over time creeped up on me. But going back to what Jason kind of said about his parents didn't let him watch Cartoon Network, I think my parents didn't necessarily not let me watch Cartoon Network, but I remember Ed and Eddie in particular had a lot of bad publicity, like in the news or something. And for some reason, they were just like, you cannot watch this one show, Ed and Eddie, because of whatever reason. So I thought that was really, really funny. So I will say one more thing about the OG Cartoon Network age that I didn't mention. There was one show that I believe was on Cartoon Network that I did consistently watch, even though I wouldn't necessarily call it a Cartoon Network show, and that would be Tom and Jerry. I don't know if you guys, yeah,
Ooh,
that was
you're
probably the only
repping.
show at that time where I would consistently flip to Cartoon Network during the morning and be like, all right, like Tom and Jerry's on, and I'm gonna watch this now.
I don't
Right,
know
kind of
what it
couldn't
is
resist.
about. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I don't know what it is about Cartoon Network, but like my parents were kind of like that too. They were like, "Don't, you can't watch this show. Like, they're like cartoons aren't good for you." But it was
Mm-hmm.
never really something that was enforced. Like if it was on, they'd be like, "You know, you're not supposed to watch this." And they'd be like, "Oh, sorry," and then we just move on.
Yeah,
Like, I wouldn't have to change the channel. They would just be like, "Hey, like you shouldn't be watching this," and then that was it. It's kind of weird.
yeah. Anything else anyone wants to add on this topic before we move on? Nope. Okay, perfect. So, following that OG Cartoon Network era, then it goes into what I consider the first wave of good shows, or just shows, in my opinion, that I really, really got into. And that first wave, what I included in there is I included Codename Kids Next Door, Ben 10, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and Teen Titans. Those were the first like OG not OG but like the first wave of those 5 shows on Cartoon Network that I started to really get into. Now I know all these shows are great. I guess let's just start with Kids Next Door because I that's a tongue teaser. That was the first one that I listed on here. I thought that show was really unique and really cool. I think what a big theme of shows, just doing one of these episodes and just talking with you guys, is that shows that or cartoons that really did it for me that I really got into as a kid were cartoons that were very creative, and every episode you didn't know what sort of invention they were going to make or what sort of wacky creation or adventure they were going to go on. I feel like that theme played really well into Codename Kids Next Door, and that was one of the reasons I really enjoyed it. Now I want to throw it over. Let's throw it over to Jason first because I know you mentioned. I think you mentioned Codename Kids Next Door. How'd you feel about the show, or if you have any opinions about it?
Um, I mean, I remember Codename Kids Next Door as like one of the part of like those first few shows that I ever watched like on a regular basis, and I just remember just like seeing like every episode was unique and did like a new thing, but still like tied in and kept like storylines going throughout each season. That just like of like like fighting the bad guy and things
Mm-hmm.
like that, and just like creating like different like relationships and just story arcs for certain characters. Like I remember Codename Kids Next Door just being like a just really great show that like if you didn't when as a kid like it's you kind of have a different like mentality when watching shows like you don't necessarily like, at least I never like watched the show like avidly like finish a whole season. It was sort of just like, oh, what's on the TV? Oh, Codename Kids Next Door. Like, I'm gonna watch that right now, and I would just watch the episodes, not knowing if it's in the right order or anything, and like not purposely watching it in that way. And like you could do that with Kids Next Door. Like you
Mm-hmm.
could like watch an episode and another episode like later on that maybe weren't right after each other, like in sequential order, and it's still like great to watch.
Right.
So yeah.
How's everybody else feel on? I'm gonna start calling it KND from now on because that's a lot easier to say.
Yeah, I guess I'll add for K and ND. I think one of the really appealing parts, looking back, also is how kind of like how grounded it was. I mean, a lot of it was, they're kids and they kind of have like these inventions, these kind of like wild adventures, but a lot of it's like, kind of quote unquote fighting against adults and how they don't want to maybe like go to the dentist or like, do homework or blah 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 blah.
Hmm.
A lot of it, I think, is kind of grounded in that idea of, they're still kids and they kind of want to, be adventurous and be on their own, but they don't want to do simple things that all kids hate doing. So I think like they kind of put certain things like that on a very grand scale, which is how a lot of kids feel about certain things, like going to the dentist or like getting a nightlight, blah 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 blah, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of enjoyed that aspect of it, that it was very grounded and kind of self-aware and on how kids actually felt about things, especially about adults.
Mm-hmm. How'd you feel, Shulman?
So like going back to K and D as like a more like older kid as a person now, like there's a lot that really smart about Kids Next Door that I didn't really think about at the time, but just makes me like it even more. Like how diverse the cast is. Like all these kids are so like different from each other, but they're all like very good friends, and it's cool because no matter like who you are, like there's someone on the team that you like identify with, and you see them all being able to interact and have fun together, and like that was always really cool. That was something I always enjoyed. The villains were always super creative. We got the father and the delightful kids, but so many other kids that like and like villains and stuff would just show up like every week. And, like you never know like what they're gonna face, and it would always be something that's like kind of like something in reality, but also very like
Mm-hmm.
to the extreme. And I always thought it was great.
Yeah, and one more thing to add to that I think KND did really really well is I believe it was kind of like an in-channel movie slash big special that they promoted with the Number Zero movie. Does anyone remember that one?
Oh, I kind
I,
of recall that.
I
Yeah,
don't really remember that.
it was like a bigger episode. Like spoiler alert, it was about his dad was like in the Kids Next Door and stuff, and he got his memory back about being in the Kids Next Door for a day, and it was a really really cool episode. I definitely, if you guys ever do watch or rewatch KND, I definitely recommend watching that like in game or in that movie slash episode.
that was something that I always really liked about Kids Next Door is they had like they set up this whole universe of like kids being like secret agents, like working fighting
Yeah.
adulthood, and they have all these like rules to their universe. Like once
Mhm.
you're over 13, like you're a bad guy, like and all this stuff, and they really like stuck to it and really developed that like oh like just because they're adults now, like they were kids at one point too, and like I thought that was really cool how like even though they're like that was the enemy, like they were once the enemy. It was a real like cool way to show about like going through life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like those well-defined kind of kid rules that don't make a lot of sense, but are still well known amongst kind of any kid.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I gotta say, like one of my like most memorable things from their show is just like the tapioca balls and like that like tapioca that like the old people would eat, and
Oh
like it
yeah,
was
yeah.
like I remember like one episode it was like a weapon. It was like a tapioca hose. It was like really funny and
Yeah,
just
I
like
remember that one.
I just remember just like it like stuck with me. Like I to this day like I think tapioca is disgusting, and I fully attribute that to that. I fully attribute like that like feeling to that show.
Yeah, I didn't know what tapioca was until that show, and honestly, I don't think I've ever seen tapioca in person. But
I
moving,
still don't know what tapioca is. I just know it's not good.
yeah, moving on from K and D a little bit. Now let's talk about Ben 10. So again, I thought Ben 10 was a really really cool concept. Like who wouldn't want to like have this watch where you can turn into a billion different aliens. I think this was, at least from my memory, this was like one of the first really really good jabs at a cartoon being like a sci-fi episodic, or not episodic, a sci-fi like serial kind of cartoon where like the show did progress. It was episodic in nature, but the show did progress and had an overarching like seasons and things happened throughout the show that I thought was really really cool. I know Shulman's a big fan of Ben 10. I want to throw it over to him first. How'd you feel about the show and like what made it unique?
Classic Ben 10 is such a great show, and I don't think we'll ever get something like it again. There's like every kid like dreams about being a superhero, but I know like even now, and like especially when I was a kid, like I would like flip flop, like oh like I want to be like Superman, I want to be like Batman, I want to do this and that, I want to be like Spider Man, and like you can never settle on one like power. You can,
Right.
they're all super cool. Like Ben 10 was like, we're just gonna have 10 superheroes. Like you can be 10 superheroes. Like that was always so cool. They were aliens that all had like these unique features about them that were always so different. And like over time, like it was really cool whenever they added a new one. It was really hype. Whenever they like learned more about like the watch and how it was created, and more about that stuff, it was always really cool to learn about this world.
Yeah, no, definitely. You just kind of convinced me that Ben 10 was completely overpowered. Thank you. I want to throw it to whoever, Jason or Bailey, whoever wants to answer. Like, how'd you guys feel about Ben 10?
Well, I remember Ben 10 just being like just a crazy out there show, at least like for my taste at the time, because I wasn't really into like sci-fi quite yet. I remember
Mm-hmm.
watching Ben 10 in elementary school, and like I mean, of course, like you got like the Star Wars movies and stuff that are like are sci-fi that expose you to that genre, but like I really hadn't been exposed enough yet um, to really like watch it like in like I don't know like watch it with like, my mind prepared for sci-fi, and overall like the show like taught me about sci-fi and like just the genre, and it like made me fall in love with sci-fi in general. And I remember like how it did the same thing to me, but also to like a bunch of other kids around me. I specifically remember there was this one like kid, like little dude in my class in elementary school who always wore a Ben 10 watch on his wrist. Never took it off.
Yeah, he was probably the
Like I
coolest kid
remember
in
asking
class.
him, "Do
Definitely.
you ever take it off?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Do you sleep with it on?" He's like, "Yes." He sleeps with it on. And like to some people that might seem like really weird, like, "Oh, what's this kid doing?" Like that's really weird. Um and like I always thought, you know what? That's not weird. It's just him living his life. Him wanting doing what he wants to do, and like him wanting to be Ben 10. You know, and so yeah,
Yeah,
I love Ben 10.
yeah. How'd you feel, Bailey? You want anything to add?
Yeah, I think you guys kind of summed it up pretty well. I think it's a great foray into kind of, I wouldn't say more mature, but just more high level
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi concepts. I mean, the world building is very good. I think just kind of the concept of being some 10-year-old kid and you have this watch that lets you change into like whatever, kind of alien is a cool concept as a kid when you watch that, because you think it's very accessible. It's kind of outrageous, but something every kid kind of wants to do. So I think I enjoyed that. But yeah, again, it also, even though it wasn't super mature, I think the way it did flesh out its characters and its overall story was entertaining. Because I mean, a lot of shows are good around comedy, like you guys have alluded to, and I mean there were anime shows like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff like that around,
Yeah.
but those were an original Cartoon Network programming. So I think for them to kind of take elements from that, and have this kind of overarching, or not overarching, but this kind of grander show about those same kind of themes was exciting. So I definitely was up there. I really enjoyed watching Ben 10. I know the video games were very fun.
Oh yeah. I had a couple of
I,
those.
I know I used to play those. So those are pretty cool. But yeah, I think it's a good first exposure to just kind of more interesting sci-fi questions, especially in a more kid-oriented format.
Yeah, yeah. Now, moving on a little bit from that, I'm gonna kind of do a 180 now. So another one that I included on this first wave, which maybe a hot take, may not be, I included the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Now, on paper, right, this show is about the Grim Reaper, who for some reason has a Jamaican accent, that lost a bet with two like five, like they look like they're 5-year-olds, even though they're probably like 8-year-olds or whatever. Like one 8-year-old Billy like is a complete idiot. Like just like honestly half the time I'm looking staring at the screen he's unbearable because he's just like screaming and makes no sense. And then you have Mandy who's literally like a super 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 like evil kid that sometimes is redeemed but most of the time is not. And on paper, like I don't know, like the show doesn't sound like it would be good, but for some reason, at least for me, I was very very entertained watching this show. I wanted to know if you guys watched Billy and Mandy, and if you did, like what were your opinions about the show? I'll start off with let's start off with Bailey this time.
Yeah, I wasn't the most avid watcher of that show, but I mean, it was pretty surreal and pretty
Yeah.
out there, which I think was fun to watch if you did watch it. But yeah, I guess maybe just as a kid, it was maybe just the kind of odd clash of characters that I didn't watch it enough. But again, now I can appreciate kind of what they were doing was it was kids pretty much going to hell with the Grim Reaper, which is outrageous. So
Yeah, yeah, it was really
I
strange.
so I think that is pretty funny. The little bit that I did watch of it, it was just funny because it was just so absurd, and I
Yeah,
think you have to appreciate it for that. So can't add too much to that, but I can appreciate it for what it tried to do.
yeah, we won't spend too much time on Billy and Mandy because I know I may be an outlier here, but I wanted to know if Shulman or Jason, if you have anything to add about the show.
Showman, if you want to go, you go ahead.
Okay, I can take it. Billy and Mandy. I never really watched it like too much, like when it was first like airing. Like as it got later on, like when the show was like starting to come to a close, is when I really like got into it. I remember like there was a bunch of movies that came out. I remember some movie about like some kind of boat race. I remember that one.
Yeah,
And that movie, like after that point, like I was hooked on the show. Like I went back and watched a bunch of the old episodes. Uh, it's not really a show that like I come back to every once in a while. Like it's not something I think about when I think about like Cartoon Network shows. But the minute someone's like, "Oh, like Billy and Mandy," oh yeah, like I love that show. Probably one of my favorite episodes is the one with Fred Fredberger.
okay.
Oh, of
Like
course, yeah.
like wins a contest or whatever, spends the day with the Grim Reaper, and he literally just bothers and annoys everybody. And he was just so funny because like what he just said the most random stuff, and as a kid like I don't know, you said the most random stuff too, but it was even more random. It was hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I don't know. I think it just there's something about the show that was definitely entertaining. I was wondering, Jason, do you have anything to add to this, or?
Yeah, I mean, Billy and Mandy is like a show that I wasn't completely into. I'm not a huge like horror person. Not saying that the show is horror, but
Yeah, it
like for
definitely had that vibe.
example, it had that vibe, and that's why like I never really watched like Courage the Cowardly Dog,
I'm in
you
the
know.
same boat as you.
And so like with Billy and Mandy, like yeah, I watched a few episodes. Yeah, it was interesting, but to me, I wasn't a lover of it purely because I don't like scary things, and just seeing Grim Reaper, even though it's a cartoon, it just put me off as a kid.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you don't like scary things. You made that very aware. But all right, moving on to a little less controversial show. Let's talk a little bit about Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
Oh,
Now this show, I really really enjoyed this show as a kid. I don't know what it was. I really liked Blue. I really liked the concept. As I said, which again I'm gonna say,
cheese.
yeah, cheese. I'm
Yeah,
gonna say a million
cheese.
times. Shows that leaned on imagination and like just like anything could happen during the show, or like something new and something completely creative could happen. And every single show, I tended to go back to more, and I tended to really really like those shows. And having this idea of, oh, like where do your imaginary friends go when you start growing up, or when you like move on to another one, like where do they go, and you have a foster home where all your imaginary friends go, and then they could be adopted to a new kid that needs to find an imaginary friend. I thought it was a really really cool concept. Now I'll just throw this over whoever wants to go first about your thoughts on the show, or if you have a different opinion or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of agree with with what you talked about with that kind of transition of passing imaginary friends. I think in that same vein, it's kind of a lot about growing up as a kid and having to kind of I guess, pass along kind of certain phases of your life, certain things you believe and what you maybe feel about, certain things. And I think that show kind of captures that well, how you kind of have to sometimes just kind of grow up and, um, leave things behind, I guess, in that kind of sense. So I really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. Shulman or Jason? Let's go to Jason. Jason, do you have anything you want to add to Foster's Home?
Yeah, I mean, Foster's Home is like, oh, how do I explain this? Foster's Home was the first show that really let me sort of, it just was relaxing to watch. It was funny, but it wasn't like extremely cerebral. So it was like perfect for like a kid. At least it wasn't super cerebral in my mind. It didn't go over my head a
Mm-hmm.
ton. And so like it was just a show that was just funny to watch and really just like something like relaxing. And like all cartoon shows are like meant to not be like stressful to watch or anything like that. But like in general, like I could always count on Foster's Home like giving me a laugh. And
Yeah.
like I remember two things, like two of the biggest things that were just like running things in Foster's Home is Blue saying it's hot in Topeka.
Right. Yeah.
That and then cheese. Cheese just going around saying cheese, cheese. It was I loved it.
Comedy gold. Comedy gold for sure.
Comedy gold, comedy gold.
All right, Shulman, what's your take on Foster's Home? Shulman, your mic may be muted. Okay. Uh, oh, it's so there's a fire truck outside Shulman's apartment currently. So, um,
All right,
whenever.
we're good.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, go for
Yeah,
it.
Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends was always a show I really loved. I kind of mentioned a bit earlier. My parents were always like, not that it was like they didn't want me to watching cartoons, but I guess they were always disappointed when they saw I was watching cartoons. So Foster's was one of the first shows that I was like able to explicitly show like this has like a message and like a meaning behind it. Like it's all about like finding your friends and finding like where you belong. And I was like, this is really cool. So whenever
Mm-hmm.
I was like able to explain that to my parents, and they were like, oh, like that's actually like really cool that like a cartoon, like a kid show, is able to express this stuff. And so I watch an episode or two with them, and then they leave like halfway through. But it was always like a really cool experience. Like all bunch of memorable characters, and they all have like this crazy backstories about how they ended up in the foster home. And it was always really cool.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It was just overall, I think we all agree it was a very imaginative show with a very good message, and I think a lot of people really really enjoyed the show. Moving on from that, we have the to round off my last little first wave of good shows on Cartoon Network. We have my personal favorite actually, Teen Titans. I really really enjoyed this show. This was another one. I want to draw similarities to Ben 10 a little bit, where it felt more serial in nature, where it had an overarching story going on, as well as being entertaining within each episode, and just overall, I think the superhero phase didn't really, or the superhero madness didn't really kick off too much yet, and this honestly might have been like a little bit of the tip of the iceberg. I really really enjoy Robin as a character now. You got to explore other superheroes that you didn't know that much about: Cyborg, Starfire, Beast Boy, and just their chemistry as a team, and their fights and everything, and all the adventures they go on. I really really enjoyed this show. I want to throw it over to Shulman first because he got to talk last time. I'm just gonna throw it right back at you. How'd you feel about Teen Titans?
I love Teen Titans. I'm a big fan of like superheroes and superhero movies and shows, and Teen Titans was one of like the first introductions into that. It was really cool to see like obviously like everyone knows Batman and Robin. Here like Robin's the cool one, and like he's with all these other characters. Like there's no Batman for him to like lean on. He has to be the leader. It was a
Mm-hmm.
really cool introduction to like Starfire and Cyborg, Beast Boy, Raven, like characters that like younger kids probably didn't really know much about, but now they're like some of our favorite superheroes. Like all the stories were really cool, and how they like picked and chose what they adapted from the comics. One of my favorite like superheroes of all time is actually only shown up in Teen Titans. Remember Moss and Menos?
Who were they?
They were the speedsters who only spoke Spanish,
Oh
and
yeah,
the whole cast run together. And it's hilarious how they only.
Sorry, go
Sorry
ahead.
about that.
You're okay.
It's hilarious how they only speak Spanish, and they just run around fighting crime. I thought it was great.
Yeah, they had really really good villains in there. I mean, Deathstroke, right? I honestly thought that
Yeah.
was a great version of
Slade,
Deathstroke.
Slade was a really good overarching villain who like it was always very personal. Whenever you saw Slade show up, you knew that something big was going to go down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to throw it over to
He
Jace or
stayed
Bailey.
a key villain even like into like the newer shows, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, actually,
So,
Jason, go ahead.
phenomenal.
Let's hear your take
Yeah,
on
go for
Teen
it.
Titans.
Teen Titans. I have like mixed feelings about Teen Titans, not because I thought it was a bad show at all, but because it never like something that I was like, oh my gosh, to like really want to watch it. But I still thought it was like a really good show. Like I'd say for me, Teen Titans, it kind of just um how to Teen Titans was very like episodic and just overall like really cool to see like this cartoon style like I guess you would say let's say animation like yeah cartoon style animation and in like the form of like these like group of like superheroes or like sidekicks kind of
Right.
like Robin's a sidekick at least and you know like related to kids it really seemed like their issues were relatable to kids. I don't really know if that really makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get
But
it. I get
like
it.
I don't know. It was good, but it wasn't like super memorable for me.
Yeah, I think
That's
everybody's
all
in a
I
different
really have to
place.
say.
Yeah, everybody. I feel like every kid was in a different place at that time. You know what they wanted to get out of a cartoon. You
Right.
know, definitely at that time for me when that show was big, I was moving towards a more like serial, you know, series and stuff where like I could watch one episode and then they're recalling things that happened in this previous episode. That was definitely big for me. Now I want to throw it over to Bailey. How'd you feel about Teen Titans? What was your take as a kid, or now?
Yeah, I was actually gonna say like I really enjoyed what made it memorable actually was how it was relatable to kids and how the superheroes were kids. I mean, they were teens.
Mhm.
You know, even everyone enjoys the kind of classic, you know, superheroes like Batman, Superman and whatnot. But I think when you have kids kind of close to your age, you know, even if they are kind of fighting forces or villains, whatever kind of issues and be seen kind of, you know, out of this world, I think the way in which they handle them as kids is relatable. Like the pressures they have to deal with, the stress of having to like have like their identities and whatnot. And I think even if it's not the most translatable thing, I think those concepts, you know, um, kind of show up later in your own life. So I think getting to see that in a kind of format like this was exciting. So I enjoyed that. And I think as you guys have spoken to the kind of whole serialized nature of the show, because now most things you watch are, you know, definitely in that kind of format. So I
Mhm.
think to move away from the kind of non-linear storytelling is good is nice because it kind of adds depth to the characters and to the story. You can kind of be really invested in it. So it made it memorable for me. So I
Yeah.
definitely enjoyed that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, those were the five shows that I classified as the first wave of good shows. Now I want to talk a little bit. So you'd watch those shows; they'd be playing during the day, but afterwards, depending on how late your parents will let you stay up, there was there was another segment also made for kids called Toonami that ran for a long time, which the Toonami shows they weren't particularly Cartoon Network shows. They were mainly, I guess you could say they were mainly Japanese esque shows, and other sort of action, maybe slightly more tween shows like Dragon Ball Z. I don't know if you guys know. There's a show called Yu Yu Hakusho. I'm trying to think what else was on Toonami, but it had a lot of those, a lot of people's introduction to um, Japanese anime shows and other action shows. I guess they put in Toonami. I was wondering if you guys also watch Toonami and your guys' feelings on it. I'll throw it over to let me throw it to Jason first. Did you watch Toonami, and if so, did you have any feelings about it?
I wasn't really a big Toonami person. Like, could you like refresh my memory on like some like the popular Toonami like shows?
So I feel like so how Toonami would start, there'd be like this robot dude that would like come into a spaceship, and I don't know, he just had a cool voice, and he'd be like, "What are we watching today?" And like Dragon Ball Z, Code Lyoko, I think was one.
Oh, I remember
Um,
that.
yeah, Yu Yu Hakusho. I'm trying to think what else.
Yeah, I
Showman,
wasn't
Showman, what
really a
else was
big
on there?
I wasn't really a Toonami person that much, so I don't really have much to say on it.
Okay, Showman, what else was on Toonami? If you refresh my memory.
Let me think. I don't remember too much about Toonami. I wasn't. I know Toonami was like my introduction to Naruto,
Oh yeah, Naruto was
Yeah,
on.
I was gonna say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
the original series on there. I remember watching that back in the day, and like that was one of the first like animes I watched. I remember people like at the schoolyard, like at recess, like doing the hand signs, and I remember
Yeah.
not really getting what they were. So it wasn't something that I followed too much, but it was something that like I'd watch every once in a while.
Yeah, I know Bleach was also on there too. I don't know if any of you guys watch Bleach, but I watched all these shows.
Yeah, I mean that's how I found out about like Inuyasha and like
Oh right,
Full Metal
right.
Alchemist. That's when I first watched kind of the more mature anime, which was exciting because you couldn't watch it anywhere else really.
Yeah, I think what was really interesting about Toonami is I would say there would potentially not be this like many people into anime in the West if
Oh yeah.
Toonami didn't, that was a lot of people's like only entry point for a long time because
Yep.
the internet in the mid 2000s and stuff was kind of all over the place, or like you didn't have access or whatever.
Right.
So I think that got a lot of people hooked on Western shows, or sorry, Japanese shows in particular. Moving on from Toonami, I feel like after the first wave of success, that again a lot of those shows ran for quite a while. They had this sort of experimental phase where they tried out a couple shows, and transitioning from that, one of the shows that wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily on Toonami, but they would show regularly, would be, I know Cartoon Network had an exclusive for this for a while, was Bakugan. Now,
Mm.
Bakugan, for you, if you guys don't know what Yu-Gi-Oh is, Yu-Gi-Oh I believe also ran on Cartoon Network, but it ran on a few different um, programs. It was a card game that was also a Japanese anime that was about people playing a card game. So some people had this bright idea, hey, why don't we make a show like Yu-Gi-Oh, except we're going to have these little magnetic balls that when you roll in, like a little monster pops out, and it'll also be like kind of a card game we'll throw in there. And like they put it in, they decided to put it in their regular programming on Cartoon Network, and for like, I don't know what happened, for like 3 or 4 years this show just like blew up, and everyone was buying all the stuff, and
I remember that.
Bakugan was a huge craze. um I don't. Let's. Whoever wants to talk on this first. Whoever wants to chime in first. If you remember the whole Bakugan craze, and what were your feelings towards the show?
I absolutely loved Bakugan. Bakugan was my jam. Like I bought as many Bakugan as I could as a kid, to the extent that my mom got so pissed off at me for spending like wasting my
Yeah.
money on Bakugan and like the wrist shoot. I had the wrist shooter. I had like a carrying case for my Bakugan. I had everything.
Yeah. So
I
you were the most
love
popular kid at
Bakugan.
school, I'm guessing.
Definitely.
Of course. I mean, whoever has the best Bakugan runs the school, basically.
For sure.
Right.
Bakugan
And
and silly bands are the currency.
Oh
exactly,
god, wow.
and the Smensels,
That's real.
Oh, and
Spencels.
Smensels. Yeah.
Don't forget the
Oh,
Smensels.
and Kooky pens. Can't forget those
Oh
either.
yeah.
Oh,
True.
cookie pens.
Underrated.
Throwback to the 2000s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I love Bakugan. Bakugan was just like it introduced me into. Sorry, no. Actually, I'm gonna have to change that. It didn't introduce me into anime. Pokemon did, but
Right.
even then, like Bakugan just kind of like just like showed me like more about anime and just like that style of like the animation and all that stuff, and it was so interesting. It because it
Mhm.
had that like Pokemon kind of style that I like loved so much, and it just was different. So it was all every anything that I watched. was Bakugan. I
Yeah.
remember waking up. I had like I'm pretty sure my elementary school started at like 8:30 in the morning or 8. I remember waking up early enough to watch Bakugan at 7 a.m.
Wow.
Those school mornings.
Jeez,
I loved it
this
that
is
much.
dedication.
Dedication.
Yeah. How'd you guys feel about it?
Bakugan
Um,
was really cool back in the day. I know that they've tried to reboot it like recently.
Yeah, they did like Bakugan Battle Planet or something.
Really?
really, I didn't even hear about
Yeah,
that. Wow.
it doesn't live up to the original. The original was really cool. Like the actual like figures that it came with were all really cool. It's kind of like the first set of those like toys come to life, like the video games like Skylanders and
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it was like that before, like but with an actual like kind of board card game, not a video game. And I thought it was pretty cool, but it wasn't super like unique. I definitely like watched a ton of it, loved it, but like looking back on it, it's definitely like you can see like all the Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon and all the inspiration that it took.
But they still made millions, boys and girls. They made millions and
Oh yeah.
millions.
Oh, that's true. They made a ton of money, and I was hooked for it too. I remember writing a letter in like the 5th grade that I never sent out. I remember me and my friend like writing a letter asking them. We said like, hey, like you should make a Bakugan game for the Wii, and you can
They
make your
did.
own person and like train with whoever you want to do and like pick your Bakugan and battle. And I never sent that letter, but you know what? There was a Bakugan game for the Wii,
Mm-hmm.
so I like to think that I helped and made that.
Well, thank you for your contribution to
I
society, Shulman.
yes,
Of
much
course.
appreciated.
All right, Bailey, how'd you feel? Let me hear your take.
Yeah, I mean, not to be a broken record, but yeah, same kind of thing. I mean, I liked how it really explored, I think, deeper themes in like a children's anime, and it kind of had that overarching kind of like air of mystery that I think shows like Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff like that would have. You know, you wouldn't know about the villain super well or like the kind of underlying, I guess, kind of plans until later in the show. So I think that was kind of exciting. It kind of kept you like hooked every week as a kid. And you know, if you couldn't read into things as well, maybe.
Right.
So I like that, and I think it was a good companion to things like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh. So if you already like those shows, this was a nice, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I think still kind of unique take on those ideas of kind of having like those bonds with like your deck or like your Pokemon. So I think you know with the craze of like the actual figurines was you know everyone kind of had their own team, their own kind of collection. So I think that kind of individualized approach um, kind of makes you feel very, I guess, unique in that kind of world. So even if it's with toys, you kind of have your own image, your kind of own brand or whatever, you know. So I think that was very appealing. That's why
Yeah.
Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! I think have a lot of appeal, and so that's why I think this, you know, kind of continued in that. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of with you guys on that. It was a very fun show for that same kind of reason like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were.
Yeah. Speaking of like creative experimental shows, the other really experimental show that Cartoon Network I feel like had at this time was Total Drama Island.
Oof,
Now,
Mm.
I
that's
I
very classic.
I want Shulman to kind of Shulman. I want you to start with this and explain the premise of the show because it's really convoluted if you really think about it, but it was definitely entertaining. And how you felt about it.
All right, Total Drama Island, the whole Total Drama franchise, the whole series is about these teenagers who compete on a game show, kind of like Survivor, where they do challenges. They split up into teams and they do challenges, and the losing team has to vote one person on their team out. And at the end of the season, if the last person left in the first season, the original show, they're going to win $100,000. And then every season afterwards, they've gone for like $1 million. And it was really cool because it was like it was Survivor, you know. It was the reality shows that were like really big at the time. Like Survivor is still pretty big now, but like that was like a huge craze, like all those kind of reality shows. But it
Mm-hmm.
was more like made for teens and like older, like 13, like 11 to 13-year-old kids. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely piggybacked off of the reality shows that were common around that time, and I think it was like the most mature I think, cartoon, at least in the non like Adult Swim, because it wasn't Adult Swim, right? It was just Cartoon
Yeah,
Network.
no, it was just normal Cartoon Network.
And that's what was weird about it. I think you'd be used to seeing other shows, whatever, like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Ben 10, Johnny Test, whatever. I mean, those were still not super kiddie, but they definitely weren't as raunchy as this was. And I think that's why I was excited to kind of like, flip through channels and say, hey, this show's on. And it was just, unique in kind of how far it would go with certain topics. So I think especially for young kids, that was definitely exciting. I know it was exciting for me. So
Yeah.
big fan of that.
I'd have to agree with what Bailey said. Just it was older for like in comparison to the other shows that Cartoon Network was putting out, and it was different. I don't really have much more to say like on it. It was a change of scenery for Cartoon Network shows in regards to just like the age group that they targeted. Because
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't targeted to like kids watching Bakugan. That was targeted to more like middle schoolers, at the time.
Yeah, I do have a funny story I do want to say about Total Drama Island. So I was definitely, it was definitely different than the shows that they were airing on mainstream. Perhaps it was a little before its time or not in the right time. I don't know. Maybe it should have been on Adult Swim or Toonami or whatever. But anyways, I just remember when we were at, I was on a trip with my parents and my brother, and we stopped somewhere at a hotel. And I remember I wanted us to stop at the hotel quickly because the new Total Drama Island episode was on at like 6 or whatever, and I needed to see who was going to get voted out or whatever, because they were doing like every Saturday, or whatever day it was. Maybe it was Thursday. So we get in
again. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and we're at the hotel, and there's only one TV in a hotel room. We're all in the hotel room. I wanted to watch the show so badly. I watch it, like I flick it on, like my parents are there, whatever, and like one of the first scenes in the show is like I forgot the two characters. I think it was Duncan. It was like the goth guy, and then like one of the blonde girls. I don't remember which one. Like they went into the bathroom and they started like making out in the bathroom like these cartoons. And I was just like, my parents are just looking at me like, Steve, like I'm like 10 at the time or 11. They're like, Steve, like what are you watching? It was one of the most awkward moments to this day that I remember. But it definitely
That explains a lot.
Yeah, so it definitely it definitely had its place. It definitely I think the only big complaint I've had about the show is I think it was a little confused about what target demographic it was going for, but I was definitely entertained.
Yeah, I think it's that same kind of serialized nature that we talked about with Bakugan and Teen Titans. So yeah, it kind of just kept you tuning in each week like a regular reality show would. I think that was exciting also for kids who weren't really exposed to that yet.
Yeah, for sure. And any other thoughts on this, or should we move on? All right, I'll take that as we're moving on. So here we go. Now after having those first great shows, we talked about Toonami. We talked about the second wave of like experimental shows. Then I felt like there was another wave of a couple of good shows. Like now I'm going into I'm at the end of middle school. I'm going into high school, and Cartoon Network's kind of like, how are we going to keep this generation's attention? And they hit me with two shows I really, really liked that I wanted to discuss. The first one was
Can I guess them?
I kind of. Did you hear what?
I said the first one? Yeah, I heard that one.
Okay, what's the second one? Yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna guess regular show.
Yes. So the two I listed that were Adventure Time and regular show seemed to continue to capture my attention when I started aging into that 14, 15-year-old range. I think. Again, I didn't really use any metrics. I didn't check the dates. This is kind of how I felt, and I grouped these two shows together in particular, for their next like two big hits in this next wave. Now I don't know how much you guys watched Adventure Time, but I definitely watched Adventure Time, and I don't know
the theme song.
Yeah, the theme song's good, but don't sing it because we're gonna get copyright striked. Anyways,
okay.
I looking back, I don't know why I like this show so much. Again, it goes back to harping on that anything could happen in the show. You're going on an adventure, you don't know what's going to happen. And even as a 13 to 14-year-old, I thought that concept was really, really interesting. Going on with that, it was like kind of episodic, but some shows connected, and it delved into like had some jokes that even though they sometimes they're kind of like poopy jokes or whatever, or like low IQ jokes. Some of them were actually, it dealt with some themes that were interesting, and there were a lot of like, I remember like some memorable quotes from Adventure Time, definitely. Now, I don't know who wants to take this over, someone that either watched Adventure Time or didn't, or what was your just whole take on the series? Just whoever wants to chime in first.
I didn't watch it a lot, so you guys can definitely take that one on.
If anyone did,
Um,
yeah.
I'll go first. I didn't really watch too much Adventure Time, like as it was airing. It was more something that like I kind of picked up episodes here and there, and then as the show was kind of coming to a close, I kind of looked into it a bit more. I watched a bunch of episodes this year with my roommate, who was very into this show, and it's one of his favorites. And it's definitely like very creative and very funny, but I don't know how they come up with the ideas they do on this show.
Yeah.
It's honestly ridiculous.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. Jason, did you watch the show at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, I watched Adventure Time in the beginning that it aired. Um, I remember it being around, like, I would say in middle school era, like sixth, seventh grade is when I was really watching Adventure Time. And again, like, it was still at the time where I wasn't really watching shows to watch the episodes in sequential order, like
Mm,
watching through the season. It was still at like in the time, at least for me, where I was just like turn on the TV, and if Adventure Time was on, I would watch it. And so I never really watched it and thought about it like based on like the arcs that they were going through, like and watching it in sequential order. So it was really whenever I watched it, it was a episode on episode basis for me.
yeah.
And in general, I'd say I liked every single episode that I ever saw. It was always something different, but it always made sense. If that like
Hmm.
if you guys understand what I'm saying, like each episode I just understood. I never really had like questions. It was sort of just like I get it, and I think that was like just a big thing for me about Adventure Time. It was it was a cartoon that wasn't too childish for the age that I was at.
Yeah. Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead. I just want to say one sentence and then I'll flip it to Bailey. I felt like Cartoon Network. I tried to like age with a certain demographic, and I did feel like the shows, like it felt like they slowly like aged with us until a certain point. But I want to throw it to Bailey for what he was gonna say.
yeah, that's a good point that you brought up about the producers of the network trying to kind of age with the original demographic. I mean, I never really thought about that, but I wonder if they did, which I think they did, given how shows would kind of progress, kind of um, marginally, I think, to kind of cater to our needs.
Hmm.
So I think you are right about that. Um, yeah, I mean, again, I didn't watch a lot of it, but I think when I did catch it here and there, I mean, it did push like the fantasy genre well. Because I think at a certain point, maybe at that point, whatever, mid 2010s or so, I think a lot of the genre was kind of oversaturated with the kind of same ideas and same concepts, and it was hard to find original programming, especially on a kids network that has to cater to a large audience. So I think for them to kind of take these risks to kind of appeal to people who have been watching cartoons for a long time shows just how much they cared about their programming and their audience. So I can respect them for that.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on from Adventure Time to, I'll talk a little bit about regular show. So for me, a regular show I watched, very like episodically. Like when it was on, I'd watch it. I like looking back. I felt like this show is actually pretty important to me in the sense that I felt like it was a bridge between the cartoons I used to watch versus like the cartoons I watch now. Like it wasn't at like the Rick and Morty level of or the Rick and Morty or South Park level of explicits or whatever or maturity, but it wasn't as like the concepts weren't as immature as previous shows. It definitely felt like a bridge like in the middle. Jason, I think you said you watched regular show a little bit or whatever. Let's get to you first, or if anyone has an opinion on regular show.
Yeah, so I mean, I watched regular show at the same time as Adventure Time, and again, like I had said, I was still in that like mindset where I just watched it on an episode by episode basis. So I never really watched it in order to get like a season arc or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. But again, like every episode was sort of just like it. I would say regular show was weird. Like
Yeah,
regular show just did weird stuff
exactly.
that was just crazy to me, but it also sent messages when doing it, which was just like it blew my mind in the
Hmm.
sense of like, wow, this show is just one of a kind. You
Yeah.
know, like literally there. I will say there is not a show that is similar to regular show at all, or that regular show kind of like imitates whatsoever. Regular show is the first of its kind, and it was just like interesting. It was weird and it was funny, and it was all there was always something new happening. And actually, I don't know if you guys know, but Steve, I know you watched the show. Do you remember Skips,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
like the ape, the Yeti?
Yeah. I loved Skips. He was one of my favorites.
Do you know who voice acts him?
Um, I don't know, but the voice does sound
You won't
familiar.
believe it. You won't believe it.
Who?
Mark Hamill.
Oh yeah, yeah. It does make sense.
Ooh.
Like,
Mark Hamill voice acts on the show. I had no idea. I just found that out, and that's crazy to me.
yeah, Mark Hamill does a great. Like, he has that raspy voice. It was actually like
Yeah.
thinking about it now, it makes sense. But that's crazy. But I want to throw it over to Bailey. If you have any opinions on regular show, or how you felt.
Uh, I didn't really watch it. I feel kind of bad that I can't really
Yeah.
contribute
Okay.
any
Yeah.
part of
No.
the conversation. But
No worries. It definitely
I
like.
know,
Yeah.
I know it's a big deal because I know I've kind of seen bits and pieces online about maybe like memes or kind of short clips, and I watched it a little bit, but not enough to be um, super memorable about it. But I thought it was I thought it was funny whenever I would see it here and there because again it was like kind of that bridge into kind of more I guess obscure and kind of oddball humor, which I think a lot of kids or adults, young adults like now. So
Yeah, and just for
it was a good
context,
bridge.
yeah, just for context, Bailey is a couple years older than us. So when
Yes.
we're like on that borderline age, he was on the borderline age a little bit before us. So a couple of the last shows that I listed on this list, definitely respectable that you missed out on those. I do,
I appreciate the
yeah,
context.
I do want to throw it over to Shulman now if you had any opinions on regular show before we move on.
Let's see. Regular show was probably I watched it a decent amount. I definitely watched it more than Adventure Time when that was going on.
Hmm.
I don't know. I just kind of liked it better because it was a lot more like, even though they were all like animals and like these weird things. At least like every episode started off a lot more normal than episodes of Adventure Time. So I kind of like that. How it was a bit more like normal at the time.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree
Sorry.
with that.
I was gonna add one more thing that you pointed out was I mean it's interesting how like well defined that kind of border is between the age gaps, and like what shows you actually are watching still at that age, even if
Hmm.
it's a small difference like our age gap. So yeah, that's
Well,
interesting.
even what's even crazier to me is like I would say like Shulman is actually a year older than Steve and I,
Yeah.
and I'd say even with that just 1 year difference, there is a gap in like the content that like we like versus what Shulman likes. I mean,
Yeah, it is pretty odd.
maybe I'm wrong, but like Shulman, would you say that like you kind of watched regular show or like you watched it on like a more regular basis?
I would
But
say I kind of watched it.
You
Like
kind of watched it. So
it
even
was
then,
definitely
like
something that I was like, there's nothing else on right now. Like I'll just throw this on. It wasn't something that I was like actively like looking forward to, and that I would, like pay like 100% attention to all the time. It was kind of just something like in the background to
yeah,
time.
Right, kind of same for him.
it
For
would be
me.
interesting to see what like I know eighth and ninth grade's a big gap. I bet regular show came out around that time. I bet that was like one of the big divides when you're moving from middle school to high school. That was
Yep,
definitely
probably.
a big transition. But
Definitely.
yeah, but I just I wanna move on to now. I felt like I went away from Cartoon Network after like the regular show Adventure Time era for a bit, and during that time they I've heard Steven Universe is one of their big shows or just ended or whatever that had a lot of praise. I know all of us didn't watch it, so we don't have to don't have to discuss it. But I just wanted to give a shout out there for anyone that watches Steven Universe. We're not forgetting to mention it. We just personally didn't watch it or haven't gotten to it yet. I do want to talk about another show that I think, as we're talking about Cartoon Network aging with us, um, I want to talk about Rick and Morty. Now, I feel like, obviously Adult Swim was always a thing on Cartoon Network, but a lot of the Adult Swim shows, you got Robot Chicken, um, and others. I don't know. I don't know what else was really on. I just remember Robot Chicken. Like a lot of them kind of didn't last that long, but you did have Rick and Morty, which was, I feel like, one of the breakthrough hits for Adult Swim, particularly for like a lot of these mature cartoons. Uh, I guess there was a market for it, but a lot of the mature cartoons were more like slice of life, episodic kind of deals that have to do with like everyday problems. Where Rick and Morty just said, "Hey, you can have a cartoon that's still going on sci-fi adventures, but also be for a mature audience, and people will watch it." Now, I'll throw it over to Bailey first this time. How do you feel about Rick and Morty, and where it stands as a show, and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, again, kind of bad on this one. I have not watched it
Ooh, okay, you
really.
gotta you
I
gotta
know, I
catch up
know,
on that.
I know, I know. I feel very outdated right now, which is kind of scary. From what I know, I mean, it's kind of in that kind of pantheon of very innovative shows because I mean, it is a cartoon, but like what it tackles and like the way it tackles things is just
Yeah.
super
Well,
super
so I
unique
want to
and kind of
rephrase this question for you then, because you
yes,
bring up an interesting point. So for you in particular, from the outside of not watching that much of Rick and Morty,
yes,
it's
sure,
still I would say that they're like certain shows can still have like certain touch points to people, like whether you saw it through memes or you saw it through other
hmm
mediums, like, or just your friends talking about it, like from someone that hasn't watched the show, like where have you heard about the show, and do you think this show has been like more prevalent than other shows, I guess, in pop culture, like online or whatever?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think you make a good point about how people find, shows, music, movies, art, and whatnot just through the internet or through memes in particular. Not even searching for it, but just seeing it kind of proliferated like in their feeds and social media. Um, so yeah, I think given what I've seen, I mean, I think just the high level of narrative content and just thematic exploration, it seems to be insane considering like what people post about and how prevalent it is across memes. I mean, it's even in commercials for the Super Bowl, which speaks a lot to how I guess influential it is now.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, it probably is like one of the biggest shows or the most like kind of, I wouldn't say cult following because it's a big deal. But one of the most popular shows and just kind of well praised shows out there. So I'm hoping to watch it at some point because I've heard it's very innovative, very kind of eccentric. So hopefully I get to it at some point. But
Yeah.
I'd say from an outside viewer, it's has a big kind of presence online and in pop culture in general.
Yeah, what I want to say real quick is one caveat that may be working against Rick and Morty a little bit is it's a lot of people, definitely my generation now, we watch our shows through streaming services, and I think you like Rick and Morty, unless you want to watch it illegally, like you watch through the Cartoon Network streaming service or whatever. But that's who's really going there. So if Rick and Morty was on Netflix or Disney, well, obviously not gonna be on Disney Plus, but let's just theoretically say it's on Disney Plus. I think it'd
I
be
wish.
it'd be a lot easier to rewatch the show and just to watch the show in general. That I want to throw it over
It's
to
on
Schul.
Hulu.
Yeah, or
It's on
Hulu.
Hulu.
It is on Hulu.
Oh,
Okay,
okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
well there you go.
But
But
who has Hulu?
who has Hulu? That's true.
I'm
I,
just kidding.
I wonder about looking at the numbers to see how much lower Hulu is than like Disney Plus and Netflix. But moving on from that, I want to throw this over to Shulman. How do you feel about Rick and Morty?
I'm a big fan of Rick and Morty. I think I know it's pretty cliche to talk about like you gotta have a high intellect to enjoy Rick and Morty, but
Of
it is
course.
like, not that they're talking about like smart concepts because like a lot of the stuff is just kind of like techno babble and just kind of saying random stuff. But like the writing on the show is so smart, the way like the character arcs and the way that the characters behave, they're very like you know exactly like who these people are and like what they would do in all these different situations. Um, one of my favorite parts about the show is the like behind the scenes. The one of the creators of the show is Dan Harmon,
Hmm.
who also went and created a Community back in the day, which is
Hmm
another one of my favorite shows. And it's cool to see like how his style from that show kind of works in this new environment, doing like a sci-fi cartoon, and how like
Well, sorry, keep going.
I just like seeing like the progression of like what he's been working on since then has been really cool.
Did you see that in the episode Autoerotic Assimilation? Um, they actually like there's a community
Yeah,
kind of like Easter egg in that episode, which I thought was really funny. How like you just like are watching the show and all of a sudden you see on the little TV it's like the alien version of Community,
yeah,
and it's essentially they make fun of the show. Like Dan Harmon is making fun of his own show in that episode, which I think is just spectacular to do. And like
yeah.
it's one of it's like those little details that kind of just make Rick and Morty so good.
Yeah.
It's just those small details that they sprinkle in that like if you see them and you realize them, you're just like, wow, like that is amazing writing.
Yeah, I also love like especially like with Community and with Rick and Morty. I'm a big fan of how like self-referential it is. It's very like aware of what it's doing.
Oh, and it fourth wall breaks all everywhere. It's great.
All the time. And that's one of my favorite parts when they can get very meta and kind of discuss things like that.
Like in the beginning of each season, how like Rick is saying season 1, season 2, like
Yeah.
oh Summer, you just ruined you just ruined the season 4 opening. Like come on, I think that's great.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like definitely meta humor has, obviously Deadpool and stuff. Like meta humor has definitely been big recently, and I personally really really enjoy it. And I love how they're self aware. I do wish that the show came out more frequently, because gotten 4 episodes.
Well, they got those 70 episodes signed on.
Yeah, one a year.
Know?
One a year. That's the plan. But yeah. Yeah. So,
I'm so excited for the new season coming out on Sunday.
oh yeah.
It's or that's not just new season. It's the second half of the 4th season, so we get 5 more episodes, and I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I've seen that. It's been on the front page of my Reddit. Everyone's so excited for it. So it's definitely a very very popular show, and this is one of their biggest hits right now, if not. And I think it's really funny that on Cartoon Network, they're literally their biggest show right now is in a show catered to adults is literally the biggest show. I think that's so funny.
That is interesting.
Yeah, I want to move on now to our final segment. I want to give everybody a chance, because I know we mentioned a lot of shows. These are, I will say, obviously it was biased towards me because I got to pick the topics, about what shows I thought were very prevalent to talk about. But I want to give everybody here a chance to talk about either their favorite shows, as well as what shows do you think they were sleeper shows that I didn't mention. I do want to throw it over to Shulman first, because I haven't thrown it to him first in a while. Shulman, do you have any some of your favorite shows that we didn't mention, and we can talk about those a little bit, as well as any sleeper shows that you wanna shout out and why you think they were underrated?
Yeah, there were definitely some very like some sleeper shows and some like underrated stuff that we haven't really talked too much about. Chowder, for example.
Ooh,
That was gonna be my sleeper show. I'm not gonna lie, that was gonna be my sleeper show, but I'll get in on this right after you.
But you can talk a bit about Chowder, because I know you're a big Chowder fan.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about it, and then I'll throw it back over to Shulman. Thank you for throwing it over to me like that. So, for the people that know me, they know I'm a man of culture, and one of the things I love to do is when I'm eating, when I'm eating lunch or when I'm eating dinner, I love watching the Food Network. Okay, now,
Guys, grocery games.
Yeah, Guys Grocery Games. Shout out
Underrated.
Triple D.
Drive-ins and dives.
Exactly. Anything Guy Fieri. If only Guy Fieri was in Chowder, that would have made it so much better.
Yeah.
But instead we got Schnitzel, who is arguably at the same level. But so
and kimchi.
Yeah, and kimchi. So moving on about this, basically, Chowder. It's kind of about a food apprentice that works for this chef, but it's really not about that at all. What I personally think I loved about it, I loved the art style. I thought it was one of the first shows that I could remember that really tried to mix that. They really get creative with the 2D animation cartoons. Let's make some scenes 2D animation, then let's make some scenes that are like actually real life, and like some really cool animation, and then their outfits were would not actually move with their bodies, like
right. It was kind of like a green screen kind of thing.
yeah,
If you get what I'm saying.
yeah, the design was like
Yep.
would flow,
Good
like
point.
not exactly flow with their bodies, and it would just like stay stagnant. I thought that was very interesting, and just overall it was a wacky show. You know, wacky things would happen about the chef apprentice. They would make weird foods. I think like purple nurples and stuff. And
Yeah.
just Chowder was a lovable character, and they went on adventures, and it was definitely a sleeper show. I really enjoyed when it came on. Now I want to throw
Who
it
was
to
like
yeah.
who was like the mammoth or elephant on that show? Who was that guy? What was his name?
Gazpacho.
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 Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
I love Gazpacho.
Yeah, sorry, Shulman. I didn't want to steal your thunder, but take it away. Take it away.
Let's see, what else was there? We mentioned Code Lyoko a little bit. I think when we were talking about Toonami, but that was always one of my favorites as a kid. All of the Ben 10 spin-offs, and then I'm gonna do one more sleeper pick to something no one has mentioned because no one really thinks of it as a Cartoon Network show anymore.
Oh, I know exactly what you're gonna say.
I gotta give a shout out to the Clone Wars.
Oh yeah, good one.
Okay.
Star Wars: The Clone Wars.
I just want to give context before I'll let you continue. So I did not, when I included the topics, I did not include the Clone Wars because even though it did start on Cartoon Network and it had like, it was obviously very integral and very popular show. I personally didn't include it because I knew Shulman was gonna shout it out, and it is on Disney right now. But go for it, Shulman.
Yeah, so it was a great show. Ran for 5 seasons on Cartoon Network before the Disney bought Lucasfilm, and then they transitioned the rights over. And it's even though the episode didn't air on Cartoon Network, one of the episodes from this most recent season is now the 4th highest rated TV show episode of all time on IMDb.
Wow.
Which goes to show you like how good this show is.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on. Let's throw it over to Bailey. Do you have any other favorites or sleepers that you wanna shout out or talk about for a little bit?
Sure. I was gonna mention Chatter. I thought of Flapjack also. That was kind of.
Oh yeah, Flapjack.
Oh, I love Flapjack.
It was just kind of weird and wacky, and it kind of felt a little uncomfortable, kind of like Courage the Cowardly Dog sometimes. I'm not sure how to really. It's been a while since I've watched it, so I can't really relate it super well. But yeah, I mean, it was very kind of old timey. They would kind of go around to like different islands looking for some kind of like, mysterious kind of vague treasure, some kind of candy, and so I think like. Even though that trope is very, very, I don't want to say outdated, but it's very old. I think it was still exciting in this kind of format because again, it was wacky. So it was related. It was kind of identifiable and wacky at the same time. I also liked what I thought about, which I think probably no one remembers, is the classic 3000.
I do not remember that.
It was Andre 3000 was a music teacher at some school, and they would go on. I want to say almost like I forgot if it was like kind of Magic School Bus-esque, but I don't think it was like that. But it was in that same vein where like you had some cool teacher and they would like do things all day, or I shouldn't say like that. They would go on like weird adventures or have like these interesting lessons. I'm not sure if it was like more surrealistic or not, but that show was interesting. Just
how did I miss this show?
Was their teacher.
I don't know how I missed that show. Andre 3000 on Cartoon Network.
That's what I'm saying. Like that idea was so odd, and I don't think a lot of kids appreciated that. But I would say that, and maybe the last one was Johnny Test.
Yeah.
Because it was very Jimmy Neutron-esque and kind of Fairly Odd Parent esque, and I think that was cool because I mean it was a little wacky, a little goofier, not as serialized, so that was pretty cool. And yeah, I think that's kind of my few sleeper ones there.
Yeah, before I throw it over to Jason, what I will say is, like, for context, Johnny Test, it was definitely a big show. I would say right after that first wave, like, all the other kind of waves we had, those weren't, like, heavily promoted on Cartoon Network, but I felt like Johnny, like, if you flicked on Cartoon Network after that first wave and, like, Foster's Home and Ben 10 and Code Candy was, like, ending, like, Johnny Test was literally on all the time. And it definitely had that fantasy vibe as well. I know there are mixed reviews on Johnny Test online because a lot of people didn't like that there wasn't that much character development, which I tend to agree with. But,
Yeah,
but I definitely
that's fair.
I feel like it didn't really need it. Like it wasn't like even though the people that were watching Cartoon Network were growing up, I thought there was still a place for that show, and especially for a slightly younger kids than us, particularly. But yeah, now I want to throw it over to Jason about any other shows, or if you want to comment on any of the shows that were set on this favorites and sleepers list.
So I kind of made like a small little like top 5 shows that I
Okay.
made. Um, and so I had at number 5 I had Kids Next Door, K&D. At number 4 I had Regular Show. At 3 I had Chowder. At 2 I actually had Rick and Morty, and at 1 I had Bakugan. And those are just like the 5 like shows that like have been most memorable to me. I'm not. It's not really like the best shows, 5 best shows that Cartoon Network has ever had, but like to me, the most memorable are those 5.
Right.
And like I had actually as a sleeper like Flapjack as one of them. And in general, the way I see it is like Cartoon Network nowadays, like now, like in the present time, their biggest shows are still. I mean, Adventure Time. Um, you've got Amazing World of Gumball. You got um, Steven Universe, which from what I hear is actually amazing, great show. And
I've
like
heard the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, like there's always been like stages and phases of Cartoon Network, and right now they're in a very good phase of like the shows that they have produced. And there was a really early good phase of Cartoon Network with Johnny Bravo, Powerpuff Girls, which we haven't really even mentioned. Powerpuff Girls, like that was an amazing show. I love Powerpuff Girls. Ed, Edd and Eddy, Dexter's Lab. I mean, that was like late 1990s, early 2000s. You started to get like Samurai Jack and like Clone Wars, and then you get like towards like when we were in elementary school, Ben 10, Chowder. Do you guys remember Camp Lazlo?
Oh yes, Camp Lazlo.
Camp
Yes.
Lazlo
Very,
was
very good.
great. I just remember that being just so goofy and so like funny. And you know, my most memorable shows were towards middle school era, and even now, like with Rick and Morty. And that's what I see as like the best shows from Cartoon Network, just because they were the most memorable to me. And in general, like all of these shows, every single like phase of Cartoon Network that they've had has always been like tailored to like a certain like I'd say like age group,
Mm-hmm.
but has like withstood the test of time.
Yeah, I definitely think Cartoon Network has continued to grow, or at least obtain the same level of, or continually put out good shows throughout their genres, or continually get better and better, which
And
is
they keep up with the times.
Yeah.
That's what it really is.
Yeah, they do.
whereas for example Nickelodeon is kind of been slumping in recent years. I really feel like
Oh yeah.
Cartoon Network has kept up with things. I just heard Shulman buzz in if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I definitely kind of agree with that. I feel like most of the talk of the town these days are about shows that are on Cartoon Network or that are just wrapping up. Like you don't hear much about the shows on Nickelodeon anymore these days, except for like SpongeBob. But that's just because it's been on for so long.
Yeah. So I just wanted to end this. I have one more quick sleeper pick that we didn't mention, that I was just scrolling through Google a little bit before this, and I was like, oh, I remember that show. Like, this show is fun to watch. This is a real sleeper. Have you guys remember this show called Mucha Lucha?
Mucho Lucho.
Yes.
I think so.
The Mexican wrestler, right?
Yes, it was about this
Oh.
masked wrestler that like
Yes,
would
I
wrestle
remember
people,
that.
and he would like, I don't know what it would do, but he would like transform into like different things, like with his signature moves. And I don't know,
Yeah.
it wasn't any of my favorite shows, but it definitely, like, I remember it was so fun to watch. It was like, it was the kids WWE. That's what it was, but it was kids.
That's kind of like El Tigre. I just
Yeah.
thought of that show.
It was before El Tigre.
Wow, I almost forgot about that. Wow.
You know what? I mean, it's gonna be
Good
kind of
sleeper.
a controversial thing to say, but I feel like that whole idea of them all like transforming and stuff, it's kind of like the wrestler version of Naruto. instead of being ninjas and all these transformations and powers and
Interesting.
stuff, wrestlers.
That's fair.
Maybe
Interesting.
I would say that's a hot take, but
Hot take.
very hot take. All right. Well, once again, that about wraps up this show. I want to thank you all for coming on, and thank you, especially thank you, Jason, for your first time. How was it?
Thank you for having me. It was great. It was great. A lot of fun. A lot of interesting conversation. I'm glad you invited me. Thank you.
Anytime, man. So, once again, if you guys don't know, this is 638 Podcast. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere that has podcasts that you can hear people talk about anything. We're probably there. If you're listening to this, you might be listening on YouTube. If you want to hit that subscribe button, you can hit that subscribe button. Go for it. Don't make Shulman sad. Hit that subscribe button.
If you make someone sad, you're on my no list.
Yeah, and thank you all.
Nobody should make Shulman sad. Shulman sad.
Yeah, do not make Shulman sad. And thank you all. Once again, thank you all for coming on, and thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you all next episode.